My name is Lauran Bethell, and I am a global consultant around issues of responses to human trafficking with International Ministries of American Baptist Churches USA. I was in Thailand from the 80s running a shelter for young women who were at very high risk of being exploited and abused, as well as girls that we had rescued from situations of human trafficking. And I had the incredible privilege of watching them heal and go on with great lives. Now I am based here in Fresno, having lived overseas for more than 40 years, and am continuing to work as a global consultant, and am proudly on the board of the Central Valley Justice Coalition.
Why do you think that it is so important that the church have the conversation about trauma-informed care?
Oh, because my goodness, it's like, why hasn't the church done this in the past? I mean, why is it just now we're beginning to think about trauma-informed care? Because there are so many people in our church communities that have been suffering for so long under some really bad assumptions about what is going on in their lives. And we really need to get to the bottom of the trauma that so many people have experienced.
Yeah. And what does it mean to respect somebody's cultural or gender background when we come to these conversations?
What it really means is that we understand that we don't take anything at surface value, that we are not making our own assumptions about what has happened in their lives, because usually there's an incredible story behind the story, behind the story, behind the story. And it very often has to do with trauma experiences that they may not even have identified as trauma. And our role as church leaders is to listen to the story behind the story, behind the story, behind the story, and not make any assumptions about what we think is going on with their lives, but to become aware of the kinds of trauma that they may have experienced in their lives. We always need to be aware that there could be people in our church communities that are getting pressure from their family communities to do things that we would think were inappropriate. I mean, I was so shocked when I started out working in Thailand that the young women would tell me that they were working in prostitution in order to support their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. That was not the way I was raised. Right. I was raised to believe that my family would take care of me. But these girls use the words, I'm sacrificing myself for the sake of my family. Mm-hmm. We have some of those contexts here within our own society that we need to be aware of. We cannot take things at face value. If we encounter a girl or a woman or even a boy who is doing something that we don't think is appropriate behavior, we need to ask the question. We need to listen to their story, behind their story, behind their story, behind their story, rather than jump to the conclusions, well, they're just being bad kids, or they're doing bad things. We've got to really think about what is their cultural context in order to really understand how to deal with these things. My go-to whenever I have families or parents that come to me and say, my child is acting out in certain ways, or my teenage daughter is being promiscuous and, or is running away with boys, and my go-to is not she's being a bad girl. Mm-hmm. My go-to is, what's her childhood trauma? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? What happened in her childhood that you as parents, you as good church-going parents, may not even be aware of? What happened? And to help that family get some really help, some good professional help, in order to look at what is going on behind the scenes. Yeah. What kind of trauma happened? Or what kind of trauma happened in her mother's life?
In a situation like that, where we're encouraging the church to bring in a professional to help with the therapeutic process and things like that, what do you see the role as the church in that moment? If they're not sitting down with this person and offering, counseling or whatever it is, what does the church do to support that individual while understanding where they've come from?
Well, first of all, we need to release judgment. We become unjudgmental people. We provide a caring community that just says, we're going to help these people in whatever ways that is appropriate, and suspend all judgment about what's going on here.
Give me an example, a specific example of when a church might be inclined to respond with judgment, but what the language could look like that would be free of judgment and would be healing.
One instance would be a child that I had heard of who was abused and by a distant family member. And the parents were absolutely mortified, did not know what to do, did go to they trusted their pastor. They just were like, what do we do? And the pastor did the right thing. The boy was acting out in the Sunday school classes, in the youth group, and so they called in the Sunday school teacher, the youth leader. The pastor actually used this as a teaching moment and helped them to understand what was going on with this child, with the parents' permission. And then there was a community response. They brought the family agreed to other trusted church members to come in, and they strategized how they could be a trauma-informed community in this church and support this family in really positive ways, with the parents really taking the lead and actually saying, this is what we want you to do, this is where we don't want you to do, these are our boundaries, and then finally bringing in the child and saying, now this is how we are going to respond. This is how, you have been through some real trauma. We know you're getting help for this. We know what's going on. When you feel triggered, when you feel anxious, when you just need to let us know, because we are going to understand and we're going to care for you through this process. And we know that there is hope for healing in the future from whatever stuff you're going through. But just know we are with you and we're going to stand with you through this.
Oh, so good. And such a reminder to me that one of the other principles of trauma-informed care is giving empowerment, voice, and choice to survivors.
Right. Exactly.
And we can't do that if we don't understand the background.
Exactly.
Talk to me about some of the vulnerabilities that people face as a result of their cultural or gender background.
Most of my adult life has been dealing with the issues of sexual exploitation. Commercial sexual exploitation, but across the whole realm. And what I've identified several vulnerabilities for exploitation, which seem to be predominant around the world. And the first one, of course, most people would think of in terms of commercial sexual exploitation would be the issue of poverty. But it's not just poverty, it's poverty plus. And something I've mentioned previously, talking about the poverty combined with the cultural expectation that the girl child will provide for the family, and the girls will sacrifice themselves for the sake of their families if that's what their families are calling them to do. And so you've got poverty, you've got unemployment, high unemployment rates in some impoverished communities. You've got the issue lack of education, where some impoverished communities just don't have access to education, or girls are expected to drop out of school. So that whole realm of poverty. And even in our own culture, we have impoverished communities here too. And we know women who are working to support their children, their families, and who are putting themselves in situations of exploitation and incredible trauma. But then you've also got the vulnerability of childhood sexual abuse. And we know that anywhere from 20 to 30% of children, girl children especially, will be abused as children.
Yeah, the latest statistics are 1 in 6 girls before 18, or 1 in 4 girls before 18, and 1 in 6 boys.
Yeah, and it's endemic. Yeah. And we have got to be aware this happens in the church as well as outside. I mean, we know some very high profile situations right now of major church leaders who have been indicted and implicated in childhood sexual abuse. And it's really, really troubling, and we've got to be talking about these things. And we know that vulnerability of having been abused as a child is going to cause us incredible trauma. Begins in childhood, but it will extend all the way through adulthood. And there are people that deal with mental health issues through their entire lives as a result of childhood trauma and childhood sexual abuse.
Also pointing out that all of those vulnerabilities exist without any choice on the part of the individual.
Exactly. Choice. I come up out of my chair when people say, well, they've chosen to carry on these behaviors. And I say, well, yeah, there's some tiny bit of a choice in there. But I often, and I want people to memorize this, choice has a very thin veneer. A very thin veneer. And you scratch beneath that veneer, that thin layer of paint, and you listen for the story behind 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 the story. And you do not make a judgment about choice. Choice needs to be eliminated from our vocabulary when we're talking about these issues. Eliminated. I don't believe that church leaders should feel that they need to be responsible to help people to heal from their trauma other than being an understanding and caring community, but that there are resources that are available, and they should avail themselves of professionals who know what's going on. But the church leaders need to know signs of trauma so that they'll know that there is time for a referral. The Central Valley Justice Coalition has all kinds of resources that they can help. And I think pastors and church leaders should always have a whole list of therapists and people who are experts in the field of mental health that they can refer to. Pastors do not have to assume this responsibility, but they are responsible for knowing some of the signs and being able to look for other resources.